who were the Celts? Is it Celts? Is it Celts? I call them Celts. Also, who were the Goths? Who were the Teutons? Who were the Normans? Who were the Franks? Who were the Britons? And who were the Anglo-Saxons? And who was the rest of the world? These names are frequently used in history, but it's all very confusing. I understand. Of course, it's very confusing. If you're not if you're not taught this, then it will be confusing. It's such a multitude of names. Okay, where do I begin? Celts, Goths, Teutons, Normans, Franks, Britons. Let's talk about the Celts and the Britons first. The Celtic peoples, well, they still exist. So the Celtic people, they lived in Western Europe. Western Europe. So if you think about, imagine Stonehenge. The Celts did not build Stonehenge. What is Stonehenge? Let's find out. Okay, Stonehenge. It's this monument in England. This monument here, very famous. Yeah, because it's in England and they put it all over the postcards in the internet. That's why it's very famous. This monument is called Stonehenge. This was built how long ago? Several thousand years ago. What's the early history? Place of burial from its beginning to zenith in 3rd millennium BC, whenever. Before the monument, Stonehenge, about 3000 BC it was built. Okay. The point is that Stonehenge was not built by the ancestors of today's British people, at least the male ancestors. It was the original British people who built Stonehenge. And then there was a genocide in the British Isles. What genocide? Well, a bunch of barbarians invaded from the east. And they crossed the English Channel and they invaded the British Isles and destroyed the local male population and procreated with the local females. This invasion was the Yamnaya invasion that rampaged across all of Europe. So the Celtic people are descendants of that. So you could say that the Celts, well, not exactly the original inhabitants of England, but long time inhabitants of the British Isles. So the Celtic people, they typically are characterized historically by red hair or blonde hair and blue eyes, that sort of thing. And they were the natives of England when the Romans arrived. And the Romans did not have a very high opinion of them because they were rather easy to defeat, apparently. So the Celt, that is the Celts in the British Isles. But you also had Celts in Western Europe. If you look at Iberia, if you look at present day Spain, if you look at present day Western France, or the whole of France, so all of that area, Transalpine Gaul, as Julius Caesar would say, all of that was Celtic land. Even the Swiss, you could say, were closely related to the Celtic peoples. Red hair and pretty wild kind of reputation, at least. So that is the Celts. Now, who are the Britons? The Britons were also the original inhabitants of the British Isles. So they were also Celtic people. And in England, in Britain, you had multiple Celtic tribes. The Pictish people and other people. The Picts typically were very heavily tattooed people historically, that sort of thing. So the Britons, and there's a region of France called Brittany, the western region of France. That's the people of that region are closely connected to the Celtic people of the British Islands. So the Britons and the people of Brittany, and when I say Britons, I'm talking about the original British people of the British Islands, not today's Britons. So these are all subsets of the Celtic people. The Celtic people were this big ethnic group that lived in Western Europe and the British Islands. Okay, now let's talk about the Goths, the Teutons, the Normans, and the Franks. Let's begin with the Teutons. The Teutons were a Scandinavian tribe. What is Scandinavia? It is present day Sweden, Denmark, Norway, that region. Let's go to the map. Here is map. Okay. So we're talking about the Sweden, Denmark, Norway, that region that is called Scandinavia. And the Teutons were a Scandinavian tribe or a North European tribe. The Romans called them the Teutons, and the Romans came in conflict with them at various points in time, and that sort of thing. So they were not a Germanic tribe; they were a Northern European tribe. That's the Teutons. And today, all the Germanic people are called the Teutonic peoples for some reason. Even the English Teutonic people. Well, they I'm not sure if it's historically accurate, but that's the connotation that is used these days. But the original Teutons were a Northern European tribe known to the Romans. So we have done the Celts, we've done the Teutons, we've done the Britons. Now let's talk about the Goths. The Goths. Now the Goths were also a northern European tribe, and they also came from the Scandinavian region originally. But they, after the demise, I mean, the Goths fought the Romans, and they proved to be very powerful adversaries, because the 4th or 5th century, the Goths sacked Rome. They besieged Rome, they broke through the gates, they conquered the city, and they sacked it. And who was the king? It was Alaric, was it? So there were two flavors of the Goths: the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths. The Ostrogoths were the Eastern Goths, and the Visigoths were the Western Goths. So it is the Visigoths who conquered Rome. Their king was Alaric, I believe, and they conquered Rome, and it was a humiliation for Rome. And eventually, the Goths went westwards, and they established a kingdom in Iberia, which is now called Spain. And that kingdom lasted until it was defeated by the Moors, the Arabs who came from North Africa and conquered Spain. So the Arabs, the Moors, they defeated a Visigothic kingdom in Spain. Okay, so that is the Goths. They were a northern European people from Scandinavia originally. Okay, now let's talk about the Franks and the Normans. First, let's do the Franks. The Franks were a Germanic tribe who lived around the Rhine River. Let's find the Rhine River. So I know exactly where to look at the Rhine. Go to the northern part of Switzerland, and you will find the Rhine because it forms the boundary. Oopsie daisy, where is it? Zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. Okay, now I see it. So somewhere here you have the Rhine. The Rhine. Deutschland and Schweiz. So it's the boundary between Germany and Switzerland. So this is the Rhine River. It's a pretty major river in Europe. And the Frankish people, they lived on the banks of the Rhine at some point in time. They were Germanic originally. And then they moved westwards into what was then eventually called Francia, the land of the Franks. And they built Christian kingdoms there. And they also fought the Moors eventually, who had conquered Iberia, which is Spain. So they fought the Arabs, the Muslims. And the greatest of the Frankish king was Carolus Magnus, or Charlemagne. Charlemagne was a great, well, you could say he's the greatest of the French kings. And he is the infamous, well, he launched the infamous Northern Crusades, which were crusades against Europeans to destroy the native European religion and impose Christianity. So that's what makes him great. Charlemagne, Carolus Magnus, pretty brutal guy, but regarded as a very great man. So he was the king of the Franks, and his kingdom was called Francia, and eventually it was called France. So the Franks were the ancestors of the French. Lastly, the Normans. Who are the Normans? Well, I have to go to the map again. Long, interesting story. So, Normans. If you see the movie Saving Private Ryan, the opening scene is brutal, isn't it? So, those of you who have seen it, I mean, you see it from a first-person perspective, as if you are one of the guys, one of the soldiers who's landing on the beaches of France, right? D-Day, 1944, whichever year it was. So those were the beaches of Normandy. Okay, Western France, Northwestern France, Normandy. Now, why is it called Normandy? Because the Normans lived there. Who were the Normans is the question, right? Who were the Normans? So long ago. I'm talking about the first millennium AD, so around 800, 900 AD. That period was called the Viking Age. The Vikings suddenly discovered that they could cross the North Sea and that they could raid England. And one of the first raids in England by the Vikings, let me try and find the place. Can I find it? One of the first raids was here, Lindisfarne. There used to be a monastery here. And the Vikings, well, the monastery somehow caught fire, and the Vikings they rescued the treasures of the monastery. Okay, well, they essentially killed the monks and stole the treasures. There was a castle here, monastery somewhere here. There are ruins there, and so on. So one of the first raids happened here, and then once the Vikings decide who are the Vikings, there were people from Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Scandinavian people. So once the Vikings discovered that you could cross the North Sea, then they started launching raid after raid of England. And England became like, besieged by the Vikings. And this continued for a couple of 100 years. This was called the Viking Age. And not only after England, they turned their sights to France. And they started attacking France. And there was this great warrior of the Vikings. His name was Rollo. So he was very good at attacking France, and he came all the way to Paris. So the king of the Franks gave him a deal. You know what, Rollo? You here, you're raiding France because you want our lands, our territories. Why don't you stop raiding? I'll give you the land you want. I'll give you a huge part of northwestern France. I will make you the duke of this region. You will be a king in your own right, but you will have to, acknowledge me as the overlord of all of France. But beyond doing that, you are the king of the region. So Rollo said, okay, I'm happy to do that. And of course, he will have to defend France from the subsequent Viking invaders, which he was happy to do. But the condition was that if Rollo accepts, then his people must convert to Christianity and marry French women. So you have to become Frankish. And Rollo accepted. So Rollo became the first duke of the region. And because they were from the north, they were called Northmen or Normans. And eventually this place became called Normandy because of them, northwest France. And one of his descendants, his great grandson, whichever it was William. His name was William. And he was an illegitimate child of his father. And his father had to go and fight the Crusades in Outremer, which is the Holy Land, so supposedly. Jerusalem, that region. That's why he had to put his illegitimate son as a stand-in duke. And the father died in the crusade, and that's why this 13-year-old boy, bastard boy, like they used to say those days, he became the duke, and he had a very tough time. But around the age of 50, he was very, very strong. He had a very powerful kingdom, duchy, and he crossed the English Channel and invaded England, and he conquered England. So he went from being called William the Bastard to William the Conqueror. And that's how England came under Norman rule. So that's the Normans. Okay, so I think we've done all of them: the Celts, the Goths, the Teutons, the Franks, the Britons, and the Normans. All right.